July 12, 1943. Nas, North Island, San Diego. The morning marine layer drifts low over the runway, softening the growl of radial engines warming on the apron. Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Thatch, wiry, sharp-eyed, and already legend among Navy fighter pilots, stands outside the ready room with a cigarette burning down between his fingers. His flight jacket hangs loose, collar up against the chill. The Pacific fog wraps around the hangars like smoke from a distant battlefield. A battlefield he knows American pilots have been losing. Far across the ocean, over the Solomon Islands, the Mitsubishi A6M0 continues carving United States carrier pilots out of the sky. Fast, nimble, viciously tight-turning, flown by men trained to perfection. The Navy's newest pilots climb into their Wildcats with determination, but the reports keep landing on Thatch's desk like death notices. Lost 2 more on patrol. Couldn't shake him. Zero turned inside every move. No chance. It was over in seconds. Thatch exhales, watching the vapor curl upward. He has read every combat report, memorized every scrap of intelligence, spoken to every returning pilot who managed to survive. And still the same pattern forms, ironclad and brutal. One-on-one, an American fighter cannot beat the Zero. Inside the ready room, a circle of junior pilots sit hunched over mugs of burnt coffee. Ensign Harold "Gibby" Gibson throws his hands up. "Sir, we can't outturn them. We can't outclimb them. Hell, we can't even out-accelerate them." Thatch steps in, closing the door behind him. "No," he says calmly, "you can't. So stop trying." The room goes still. He moves to the chalkboard, drawing 2 planes, one marked F4, one marked 0. The chalk scrapes sharply, punctuating every word. "I've read the numbers. I've talked to the boys who fought them. The Zero's superior in every way except armor and fuel tank protection. But if we treat this like a fencing match, we die. If we treat it like a gunfight, we might just have a chance." Gibby frowns. "Sir, with what tactics? We've tried everything. Not everything." Thatch taps the board. "We fight in pairs. We force the Zero to choose, attack one, expose itself to the other." The idea had been brewing in his mind for months, but numbers alone weren't enough. He needed certainty. He needed proof. And the spark, absurdly, had come not from manuals, but from a moment alone in his kitchen, staring at a box of wooden matchsticks. He remembers the evening perfectly, his wife setting the table, the children laughing in the living room, and Thatch himself arranging matchsticks on the surface, sliding them like little airplanes across the wood grain. If a Zero chased one aircraft, and the second aircraft mirrored the turn toward the attacker, the geometry shifted. The angles changed. Suddenly, the Zero, once dominant, found itself crossing into the firing line of an American wingman. He had stared at the matchsticks for nearly an hour, then whispered to himself, "It'll work. It has to work." Back in the ready room, the young pilots lean forward as Thatch draws sweeping arcs on the board. We call it the Thatch weave. One plane turns toward the other, forcing the enemy to overshoot or expose his flank. You don't evade alone. You cross your lines of flight deliberately, dangerously, but with purpose. Lieutenant Ronald Langley raises a hand. "Sir, this seems risky." "It is risky," Thatch replies, "but not as risky as doing the same thing pilots have been doing for months. Dying alone in tight turns, they cannot win." He places the chalk down. "You're not trying to survive. You're trying to kill the man chasing your friend." A gust rattles the window panes. Outside, another Wildcat engine sputters to life. Thatch looks at his men. Mostly boys, really. Pilots who have seen classmates go down in flames. Pilots who have written letters home for comrades who never returned. Pilots who know they are next unless something changes. "It's time," he says quietly. "Let's take her up." Minutes later, two wildcats roar down the runway, wheels leaving the earth as the sun finally breaks through the fog. They spiral upward until the world below shrinks into tidy squares of farmland and ocean. At 8,000 feet, Thatch's voice crackles over the radio. "Gibby, you're the Zero. Come get me." The mock dogfight begins instantly. Gibby dives, gaining speed, turning inside Thatch exactly as the Japanese would. But this time, Thatch doesn't try to outturn, outclimb, or out anything. He simply banks toward his wingman. Gibby adjusts to pursue and finds himself crossing directly into the guns of the second wildcat. "Jesus!" Gibby shouts over the radio. "If this were real, you'd be dead," Thatch finishes. They repeat it again, and again, and again. Each pass confirms the truth. The Thatch weave works. As they descend, the sun blazing across the Pacific, Thatch finally allows himself a rare, thin smile. The Zero may be superior. The Zero may be deadly. But the Zero cannot kill what it cannot corner. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, American pilots have a fighting chance. Continue August 7th, 1942. Over Tulagi, Solomon Islands. Dawn breaks in streaks of violet and gold across the scattered islands below, the humid air shimmering as sunlight climbs over the ridgelines. Engines roar from the decks of USS Saratoga, USS Enterprise, and USS Wasp. Three carriers launching everything they have to support the Marines landing on Guadalcanal. Among the fighters throttling into the sky are four F-4F Wildcats led by Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Thatch himself. His cockpit vibrates as he levels off at 12,000 feet, canopy glass fogging at the edges with the lingering moisture of the tropics. He wipes it with a gloved thumb, eyes scanning the horizon. Beneath him, the turquoise shallows around Tulagi glint like shattered glass. Ahead lies the unknown. This is not a chalkboard demonstration, he thinks. This is where men die or live, based on whether an idea holds. The radio crackles. "Jimmy, this is Gibson on your wing. Picking up some chatter from Marine scouts on the island. Japanese activity north of Tulagi." Thatch's reply is steady, almost cold. "Keep your eyes open. They'll come fast and they'll come high. They always did." The Zero, light, agile, absolute master of the vertical plane, favored the surprise dive. A lethal slashing attack that sent wildcats tumbling before pilots even realized they were under threat. But today, Thatch hopes, things will be different. As the wildcats sweep north, the tropical haze begins to clear. The sea ahead darkens to deep cobalt, pocked by the shadows of distant clouds. For a moment, everything is quiet, almost deceptively peaceful. Then Gibson's voice snaps through the headset. "Bandits, 10 o'clock high. Looks like Zeeks, at least 4, maybe 6. Thatch spots them immediately, sleek silhouettes angling down from the sun, sunlight flashing off their wings like blades. His heart pounds once, hard. "This is it, boys. Tighten up. Pairs only. No lone heroes." He nudges the throttle forward. The distance closes fast. The first Zero dives directly at Thatch's division, its engine a high-pitched snarl as the Japanese pilot commits to the attack. Tracer rounds snap past Thatch's canopy, a whip crack of green fire. He ducks instinctively, banking hard, but not away. He turns toward his wingman. "Langley, on me, execute the weave." Langley doesn't hesitate. The wingman arcs inward, crossing paths with Thatch in a dangerous, deliberate convergence. The attacking Zero follows Thatch, predictable, eager, believing the heavy, slow-turning wildcat is an easy kill. But as Thatch's aircraft slides across Langley's flight path, the geometry of the fight changes instantly. In Langley's gun sight, the Zero fills the entire frame. "Taking the shot," Langley calls. Flashes erupt from the wildcat's wings. The .50 caliber Brownings thunder. The Zero jerks mid-air, once, twice. Then a trail of black smoke unfurls from its engine cowling. The enemy fighter rolls, wingtip grazing the air, spiraling toward the sea. "Confirmed hit," Langley shouts. Thatch doesn't celebrate. "Stay focused, more coming." 3 additional Zeros peel off. Splitting into attack runs, they expect panic, chaos. They get formation discipline instead. Pairs weave now. The Wildcats cross again. 2 pairs fighting as one, sliding past each other in tight, interlocking arcs. The Zeros commit to their chosen targets, and each time they do, they drift across the nose of another Wildcat. A second Zero bursts into flame. A third breaks off, trailing smoke. A fourth overshoots wildly, forced to climb or die. Thatch hears Gibson laughing over the radio. A breathless, disbelieving sound. Sir, it's working. They don't know what to do." But Thatch knows the fight isn't over. A Zero swings around in a wide loop and comes tearing down at Gibson's 6. "Gibby, turn into me, now." Gibson banks hard. The Zero follows and again crosses directly into Thatch's firing arc. Thatch squeezes the trigger. The recoil vibrates through the stick, rattling the entire airframe. Tracers flash upward and carve across the Zero's fuselage. The Japanese fighter disintegrates in a blossom of flame and metal shards. The sky goes eerily quiet. Only the rumble of engines and shallow breathing over the radio fills the headset. Gibson exhales shakily. "Sir, the weave saved my life." Thatch adjusts his throttle, scanning for more threats. "It saved all our lives." Below them, the waters of Tulagi glimmer darkly, reflecting the rising smoke of the fallen. The Wildcats reform into tight formation. 4 aircraft, 4 survivors. This was more than a victory. It was validation. A proof written in fire and steel that American pilots didn't need superior machines to win. They needed superior thinking. Thatch watches sunlight break fully across the horizon, illuminating the coral reefs and jungle canopy below. The Marines are landing. The campaign is beginning. The enemy is not invincible, and the tactic born from matchsticks on a kitchen table has just entered the unforgiving arithmetic of war. August 21st, 1942. Henderson Field and Guadalcanal. The night has barely lifted when the humidity settles like a wet blanket over the jungle clearing known as Henderson Field. The airstrip, little more than crushed coral and packed earth, steams under the first touch of dawn. Marines move through the haze like shadows, rifles slung, helmets dusty, eyes hollow from weeks of sleepless vigilance. A battered Wildcat taxis slowly across the field, its tires carving deep grooves in the damp soil. Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Thatch climbs out, sore from the long flight in from the carrier. His boots hit the coral with a crunch. He pauses a moment, breathing in the sulfur-tinged air. Guadalcanal smells of damp earth, aviation fuel, cordite, and nervous sweat. A smell that clings to men long after they leave the island. A Marine corporal approaches, saluting. "Welcome to the Cactus Air Force, sir. Hope you brought miracles." Thatch cracks a thin smile. "Just here to observe the boys and help if I can." Help is needed. Henderson Field is under constant threat. The Japanese launch air raids almost daily. Zeros prowl the skies like wolves, and the handful of Marine and Navy pilots stationed here are fighting odds no training syllabus prepared them for. Thatch doesn't head for the command hut. Instead, he walks straight toward the dispersal area, where a cluster of Wildcats sits parked in uneven rows. Mechanics mutter curses as they wrestle with damaged engines and patched-up fuselages. Every plane here shows scars. Bullet holes, scorched paint, ripped metal sealed with improvised rivets. The pilots look worse, gaunt, exhausted, some barely out of adolescence. Among them is Captain John L. Smith, commander of VMF 223, his flight suit stained with engine grease and sweat. He turns, recognition lighting his eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," Smith mutters. "The weave man himself." Thatch grips his hand firmly. "Heard your boys are seeing a lot of action." Smith laughs without humor. Action? Sir, the Japanese own the skies every night and contest them every day. If one of my men lives long enough to get 3 kills, he's practically an old man. He gestures toward the flight line. Come, talk to them. They need something. Thach steps into the semicircle of pilots, grim faces lifted toward him. Some straighten at the sight of the legendary tactician. Others just stare, hollow-eyed. One pilot, a lanky youngster named Second Lieutenant Marion Carl, raises a hand. Sir, with respect. The Zero turns tighter than we do, climbs better, and dives just as fast. How are we supposed to fight something that outmatches us in every way? Thach nods slowly. That's the problem. And you're right, the Zero is better at almost everything. But you're not alone up there. You fight in pairs, you fight smart, and you let the enemy's strength become his weakness. Carl frowns. His weakness? Yes, Thach replies. The Zero relies on committing to a target. Japanese pilots are aggressive, disciplined, and trained to pursue decisively. You use that against them. When one of you is tailed, turn toward your wingman. Force the Zero into his line of fire. A murmur spreads among the pilots. Smith crosses his arms. You're describing the Thach weave. We've heard talk. But hearing is one thing, seeing is another. Thach smiles faintly. Then let's give you a demonstration. A few hours later. The tropical sun hangs high, beating down on aircraft skins hot enough to burn bare hands. Thach and Smith climb into their Wildcats, engines sputtering to life. The roar echoes across Henderson Field as mechanics dive clear. They lift off. Wheels snapping upward, climbing into the humid blue. Once they level out, Smith takes the role of the attacker, diving on Thach with practiced aggression. Thach banks sharply, not away, but toward his wingman, who mirrors the turn with perfect precision. Smith follows the target, instinctively as Zero pilots would. And suddenly, in less than 3 seconds, Smith flies straight into the firing arc of the second Wildcat. Smith pulls up sharply, laughing through the radio. Son of a gun, it really works. They repeat the maneuver. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time, the geometry traps the attacker. Back on the ground, word spreads like fire across the base. That afternoon, the pilots of the Cactus Air Force gather around a crude map scratched onto the earth. They trace flight paths with sticks, mimicking Thach's motions. They rehearse the timing, the angles, the trust needed to cross paths at lethal distances. That trust is the hardest part. That evening, as darkness falls and the jungle hum intensifies, Japanese bombers scream overhead, escorted by Zeros glowing like embers in the moonlight. Anti-aircraft guns thunder. Marines dive for cover. But the next morning, August 22nd, 1942, the Cactus Air Force rises into the sky with something new. A plan that might keep them alive. The Zeros come streaking down from altitude, engines shrieking. Thach's tactic unfolds for real, pairs splitting, converging, weaving, and suddenly the butcher's bill changes. A Zero dives on Marion Carl. Carl turns inward. The attacker crosses into Lieutenant Bob Geese's sights. A burst of tracers, a plume of smoke, another kill. Dear God, Carl whispers into his mask. This changes everything. Thach watches from the flight line as the surviving Wildcats limp home, wheels touching coral, engines coughing. The pilots climb out, trembling, drenched in sweat, but alive. Alive, because a simple idea born from Matchsticks now shapes the skies over Guadalcanal. The weave is no longer an experiment, no longer a theory. It is becoming doctrine, written in the blood and survival of the men who need it most. September 13th, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The morning begins with the low rumble of distant artillery. the kind that rolls across the jungle canopy like thunder from a different world. Marines glance up from their foxholes, their nerves tight as bowstrings. Today marks another day in the grinding contest for control of the island and the skies above it. But in the northeastern corner of the airfield, a different tension crackles through the air. Pilots of the Cactus Air Force pace around their patched-up Wildcats, mentally rehearsing the heating coils of the thatch weave like soldiers practicing bayonet drills. There is no bravado here, only determination. They have seen the tactic work. They have buried men who died before they could learn it. Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch walks the flight line, hands clasped behind his back, observing with the eye of a teacher and the heart of a warrior. He stops near a group of pilots studying a rough sketch drawn in the dust. Marion Carl looks up. "Morning, sir. Word from scouts says the Japanese flew recon last night. Likely means a big attack inbound." Thatch nods. "They know we've been taking their Zeros down. They'll come in force. And when they do," Carl says with grim resolve, "we'll weave them into the sea." A Marine runner sprints toward them, waving a signal sheet. "Raid inbound. 40-plus aircraft, bombers with heavy escort." The pilots freeze for half a heartbeat. Then training takes over. Moments later, engines roar to life, spinning clouds of coral dust into choking spirals. Wildcats line up, trembling with pent-up fury. Thatch climbs into the cockpit of a borrowed F-4F, sliding the canopy shut as the engine thrums beneath him. "Cactus Control, this is Thatch. Wildcats are rolling." "Roger, Thatch, Godspeed." The runway flashes by in a blur of white and beige. The Wildcat leaps skyward, climbing hard through the humid air. The sky above Guadalcanal is a vast, blinding blue. Too big, too quiet. Then, through a break in the clouds, Thatch sees them. A formation of Mitsubishi G4M Yaoi Betty bombers. Their silver-green skins glinting like fish scales, flanked by a swarm of Zeros. The escort is massive, far larger than any previous strike. "They're throwing the whole toolbox at us today," Thatch mutters. The Zeros break formation first, diving with predatory precision. Thatch keys the radio. "All pairs, initiate the weave as soon as you're engaged. Keep discipline, keep spacing, and trust your wingman." The first wave of Zeros streaks past, cannons flashing. One Wildcat shudders violently, hit, but remains airborne. Thatch banks sharply into the opening moves of the weave. His wingman, Lieutenant Giese, mirrors the motion. A Zero latches onto Gise's tail, closing the distance with the deadly patience of a swordsman. Giese calls out, breathless, "He's got me locked, turning into you now." Thatch tightens his arc. The Zero, committed to the pursuit, flies directly into his line of fire. Thatch squeezes the trigger. The Brownings thunder, the recoil jolting through his arms. The enemy fighter erupts in sparks and flame, spinning downward like a burning hawk. "That's one," Thatch says, voice level. But the sky is chaos now. Intersecting contrails, tracer streaks, the rising wail of diving engines. More Zeros pour in, determined to smash the defense that has begun costing them so dearly. Carl's voice crackles through the radio. "I've got 2 on me. Initiating weave. Need support." Giese responds instantly. "Turning toward you, bring them in." The choreography unfolds in brutal beauty. 2 Wildcats crossing paths at mere yards apart. Too close for comfort, too close for error. While the Zeros, forced to choose a victim, commit fully. The geometry punishes them. Again and again, the attackers find themselves exposed to converging fire. A Zero explodes in the air. Another plummets, trailing smoke. A third pulls up abruptly, sensing the trap, but too late. Still, the Japanese push harder. The Betty bombers descend toward Henderson Field, their bomb bays yawning open. Thatch steadies himself. "We break weave only to strike the bombers. Make it count." He dives. The air tears past the canopy. His wings vibrate violently. A Betty fills his gun sight, massive, sleek, unaware. He fires. Rounds rip through the bomber's wing root. Flames burst outward. The aircraft rolls, engines coughing, spiraling downward toward the jungle. Behind him, Carl and Smith repeat the maneuver, tearing into the formation. Within minutes, the bombers are scattering, crippled, fleeing. The Zeros, having failed to protect them, face the unthinkable. An American fighter force fighting not defensively, not fearfully, but with a unified, lethal resolve. A surviving Japanese pilot pulls hard into a climbing turn, briefly crossing near Thatch's Wildcat. Through the canopy, Thatch glimpses the man, eyes narrowed, face stoic, yet unmistakably shocked. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Not here. Not against Wildcats. Not against opponents they once slaughtered with ease. When the final Japanese fighter disengages and vanishes into the clouds, Henderson Field stands, smoking, cratered, but unbroken. Back on the ground, as Marines rush to repair the runway, the Wildcats taxi in one by one, engines coughing, fuel low. Mechanics swarm them, patting bullet holes like battlefield wounds. Carl climbs out of his cockpit and approaches Thatch, face streaked with sweat and oil. "Sir," he says, voice trembling with adrenaline. Today felt different. We weren't just surviving. We were winning." Thatch nods quietly. "That's the point of the weave. It gives you control." Carl looks back at the sky, now calm, deceptively serene. "The Japanese won't forget this." "No," Thatch replies, "but neither will we." And on that smoldering strip of coral and dust, the balance of power in the Pacific Air War tilts. Subtly, but permanently. September 20th, 1942. Rabaul Naval Air Station, New Britain. Rain pours across the metal roofs of the Japanese forward base like sheets of gravel, drumming a relentless cadence into the morning. Inside a dimly lit operations room, a group of senior officers stand around a map of the Solomon Islands, faces rigid, jaws clenched. The loss reports from the latest air raid on Guadalcanal sit stacked on the table, too thick, too heavy. Zero fighters, once symbols of Japanese aerial dominance, are missing. Pilots who were among the finest in the Imperial Navy have not returned. And for the first time since the war began, the Americans have shot down more aircraft than they lost. Commander Takeshi Kazuo, a veteran pilot with over a decade of service, breaks the silence. "These Americans, they are not turning with us anymore." Another officer frowns. "They've changed tactics?" Kazuo nods slowly. "Hi. Their fighters cross paths deliberately. They fight in pairs, always in pairs. The moment a Zero commits to attack, another American appears in perfect position to fire." A murmur spreads through the room, confusion mixed with frustration. "Impossible," one of the younger lieutenants insists. "Crossing paths at such close range is suicidal." Kazuo's expression hardens. "Yet they do it, and it works." He gestures toward the loss sheet. "This is no coincidence. This is doctrine." The officers fall into uneasy silence. For months, the Mitsubishi A6M0 had been the specter haunting the Pacific. A machine almost supernatural in its maneuverability, flown by pilots trained in the most demanding program on Earth. The Americans had been outclassed in nearly every skirmish. But now the Zero is bleeding. And something in the American method, something engineered, deliberate, practiced, is responsible. "If this continues," Kazuo says, lowering his voice, "our advantage will evaporate." The room stiffens at the implication. Because in war, when superiority dies, men die with it. Meanwhile, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The rains break just after noon, leaving the air heavy and steaming, the coral strip glistening with puddles that shimmer like molten glass. Pilots from the Cactus Air Force crouch beneath a makeshift tarp to escape the worst of the heat. Jimmy Thatch sits on an ammo crate, mapping out another variation of the weave in the dirt with a wooden stick. The men listen intently. So if they come in pairs of attackers, Thatch explains, sketching 2 small circles to represent zeros, you counter with diagonal weaves. Never mirror their formation. Intersect it. Mary and Carl nod slowly. Make their commitment trap them. Exactly. Thatch taps the dirt. Their aggression becomes predictable. That predictability becomes fatal. One pilot, young Lieutenant Hatch, scratches his forehead. Sir, with respect, how do you know this will work against larger formations? Thatch picks up a small stone and places it among the drawn lines. Because the weave forces decisions. Bad ones. Even a formation can't attack simultaneously without breaking discipline. And once they break discipline, Carl finishes the sentence quietly. They become prey. Thatch gives him a nod. Behind them, a crew chief runs up, saluting sharply. Sir, new intel from naval code breakers. Japanese chatter indicates they're aware of the weave. A ripple passes through the group. Hatch exhales sharply. So they'll adapt. Maybe, Thatch replies. But geometry doesn't care what they know, only what they can do. He stands, brushing the dirt from his palms. The zero still turns tighter, still climbs faster. But they can't outthink us. That's our edge. That evening, the test begins. Shortly before sundown, scouts on the ridge report movement. Dozens of aircraft lifting from Japanese airfields on Bougainville. The Cactus Air Force scrambles, engines whining in protest as tired machines and exhausted men surge once more toward the sky. The Wildcats climb against the fading light, their silhouettes sharp against the orange horizon. Thatch leads from the ground this time, coordinating from Henderson Field's crude control post. He grips a headset, listening as the pilots ascend into combat. At 10,000 feet, the first radio call hits. Zeros approaching from the north. 20, maybe more. Pairs, Thatch says into the mic. Stick to the weave. Do not break. The attack slams into them like a hammer. Zeros dive out of the sun. Fast, surgical, disciplined. Carl's voice bursts through the static. 2 on me, initiating the weave. Another voice responds, breathless. Crossing now, keep steady, bringing them into my sights. Second stretch, engines howl, then splash 1-0. Thatch exhales. A second message follows almost immediately. Another one down. They're overshooting. They can't follow both of us. But the Japanese are learning. 2 Zero pilots attempt a counter. One feints toward Carl but breaks off at the last second, trying to catch his wingman off guard. Instead, the maneuver slips directly into a descending Wildcat pair, executing a rolling weave. Gunfire erupts, metal shreds, a Zero spirals down in flames. The counterattack has failed. The sky belongs, if only for tonight, to the Cactus Air Force. Back on the ground, as darkness settles and the smell of scorched aviation fuel hangs thick in the air, Carl sits beside Thatch on a sandbag wall. They're adapting, Carl says quietly, but not fast enough. Thatch watches the distant glow of burning wreckage on the horizon. No tactic lasts forever. But right now, this one gives us time. And time, he adds, looking toward the battered aircraft lined up across the strip, is the currency of victory. Carl leans back, breathing deeply. Feels like we've torn a piece out of their legend. Thatch nods, his voice low. Legends can't survive geometry. And somewhere far across the Pacific, deep inside Japanese command rooms, a colder truth is beginning to take shape. The Zero is no longer unstoppable. The Americans have found its shadow, and a tactic born from Matchsticks is rewriting the future of air combat. October 2nd, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The morning dew still clings to the elephant grass when the ground shakes beneath another artillery concussion. The Japanese pound the airfield nightly. Shells screaming through the darkness, shaking tents, blowing coral dust into men's teeth and bedrolls. But by sunrise, the Cactus Air Force is back on its feet, wiping grime from their goggles, patching holes in battered wildcats, refusing to yield an inch. Jimmy Thatch stands beside a fuel drum, clipboard in hand, scanning pilot rosters. The men look leaner than they did weeks ago, sharper somehow, like steel honed against stone. Exhaustion etches their faces, but something new burns in their eyes. Confidence, hard-won, fragile, but real. Across the runway, Lieutenant Bob Geese and Marion Carl argue over chalk marks scrawled across the side of a wildcat. That turn was too wide, Carl insists. You gave the enemy room to slide out of the trap. Jeezy shakes his head. No, my spacing put him exactly where I wanted him. The mechanic nearby chuckles. Gentlemen, maybe argue after we patch the wings? Carl gestures to Thatch as he approaches. Sir, settle this. In the weave, what's the maximum spacing between crossing aircraft? Thatch studies the chalk diagram. If the Zero pilot commits early, tighter spacing forces him into the zone faster. But if he delays, too tight and you risk collision. Carl raises an eyebrow. So, Thatch says with a thin smile. It depends on how aggressive your opponent is. A calm pilot requires tighter geometry. A hot-headed one, you give him space. He'll close the gap for you. Carl grins. Knew it. Jeezy groans. That's not settling, it's philosophy. But he's wrong. It is settling something. Because these men, once afraid, overwhelmed, facing impossible odds, are now dissecting aerial combat with the discipline of chess players. The weave has given them structure, purpose, a sense that survival is not luck but method, a method they've learned to trust. Hours later, the sirens wail. Zeros inbound again, more than a dozen. The scramble bell clangs like a heartbeat. Pilots sprint for their aircraft, boots pounding on the coral. Thatch watches from the ground as the Wildcats claw upward, their engines spitting black smoke into the humid sky. In the command shack, the radio crackles with layered voices. Bandits at Angels 12. 2 diving on me, initiating weave. Crossing. Don't widen, bring him in. Thatch grips the handset tightly. He hears every ragged breath, every groan of straining engines, every rattle of machine gun bursts tearing through thin air. Then he hears something much rarer. Laughter. Carl's voice rings out, exhilarated. Splash one. He flew right into it. Another pilot joins in. Scratch another zero. He overshot like a rookie. These aren't boys being hunted anymore. They're learning to hunt back. In the air, 14,000 feet above Guadalcanal. Marion Carl banks hard left, pulling 3 zeros into the opening moves of a broad weave. His wingman, Lieutenant Hatch, crosses perfectly. The enemy pilots commit aggressively, too aggressively. The first zero streaks into Hatch's gun sight. Hatch fires. The second zero tries to climb, but Carl twists upward in a tight climbing arc. A move impossible weeks earlier, but now muscle memory. His guns roar, tearing across the zero's wing. The third tries to peel away, but another Wildcat pair, Jeezy and Lieutenant Graham, swing into position like wolves closing a circle. The weaving geometry compresses the last zero between converging arcs of fire. The Japanese pilot has nowhere to go. Tracer fire converges. The zero disintegrates in a burst of flame. Wildcats sail past the debris in synchronized motion. Alive, intact. 4 down. Carl reports, breathing hard. We hold the sky. Back on the ground, a rare moment of calm. Smoke rises from distant jungle ridges, but Henderson Field is still standing. Mechanics roll open the cowling of a Wildcat, shaking their heads at a bullet hole barely an inch from the fuel line. That weave saved you again, the mechanic mutters. Geese wipes sweat from his brow. The weave saves all of us. Sir. He turns to Thatch. I keep thinking about the Japanese. What must it feel like? They come in expecting us to turn and die. But now we turn into them. Thash nods. The zero depends on dominance. When you take that away, you take away the pilot's confidence. Carl sits on an ammo crate, sipping water from a dented canteen. Feels like we're using their strength against them. We are, Thatch replies. Their turning ability forces commitment. Their commitment makes them predictable. Predictability kills. Outside, Wildcats taxi for refueling. Dust rises around them in swirling clouds. The men watch in silence. Then Carl mutters, "You know, sir, a few weeks ago we were counting how long we'd last. Now, Thatch prompts. Carl looks up, a hardened grin forming. Now we're counting how many we can bring down before they stop coming. Thatch doesn't smile, but he feels something shift inside him. A truth, settling like a weight in his chest. The zero hasn't changed, but the men facing it have. Through discipline, adaptation, and a tactic drawn in matchsticks and sweat, American pilots are transforming from prey into predators, and the Japanese, once feared as unbeatable, are learning the most painful lesson of war. Superior machines don't matter when the enemy learns how to think better. October 25th, 1942. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. The pre-dawn sky is a pale smear of violet as two great American carriers, USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, cut through the restless Pacific swells. The sea is unnaturally calm, as if holding breath before a storm. On the flight deck of Enterprise, Wildcat fighters sit lined in tight rows, their metal skins shimmering with salt spray. The men readying them move with a solemn, deliberate efficiency. Today, everyone knows, will be decisive. The Japanese combined fleet is closing in, and with it comes the full fury of the Imperial Navy's air arm, hundreds of aircraft, including the dreaded Zeros. Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch stands near the island superstructure, squinting eastward through binoculars. His jaw tightens. He has been at Guadalcanal for weeks, training pilots, refining tactics, rewriting doctrine in real time. Now he has been recalled to the Carrier Task Force, just in time for one of the biggest battles of the Pacific War. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Leroy "Roy" Gross, Enterprise Air Group Operations Officer, scratches the back of his neck. "Jimmy, think the weave will hold under this kind of pressure?" Thatch lowers the binoculars. "The weave isn't magic, it's discipline, geometry, trust. If they stick to it, it'll hold." Gross exhales. "Let's hope our boys remember that when the sky fills with zeros." Below them, the klaxon blares, "Enemy aircraft inbound, all pilots to your stations." Thatch doesn't hesitate. He descends the ladder, boots clanging on steel, heading straight for a parked Wildcat. Moments later, 12,000 feet above the Pacific. The Wildcats rise into a sky rapidly filling with black specks, enemy dive bombers, torpedo planes, and their escorts. The first glint of sun catches the leading edge of the Japanese formation, and suddenly the air is alive with movement. "Zeros at 1 o'clock high, at least 20, a pilot shouts. Thatch steadies his breath. "All Wildcats, hold formation. Don't scatter. They want chaos. We fight in pairs. We weave. We survive." The Japanese dive in perfect synchronized attack runs, a deadly curtain of glinting wings and snarling engines. Their discipline is unmistakable. Their precision, terrifying. But the Americans have something new. The first Zeros commit to attack. Their intended victims, Marine pilots from VMF 112, turn sharply toward each other, crossing paths in a maneuver unimaginable before Thatch's doctrine spread through the fleet. The Zeros follow instinctively, aggressive as always. Then it happens. A Wildcat pair, Lieutenant Bob Geese and Ensign Harlan McClure, execute the weave with surgical precision. Geese banks inward. McClure shadows him exactly. A Zero dives after Geese, its pilot anticipating a panicked brake turn. Instead, Jeezy drags the Zero straight into McClure's firing line. McClure fires a single, perfect burst. The Zero ignites like magnesium, trailing flame as it spirals downward. Another Zero attempts to break away from the trap, climbing sharply. But in doing so, crosses into the arc of a second Wildcat pair. Two more Zeros fall in under a minute. Japanese discipline is flawless. Their instincts are fatal. In the middle of the melee, Thash locks onto a Zero tailing one of Hornet's pilots. The American fighter weaves inward, just as he trained. The Zero closes the distance, preparing to fire. Thatch crosses in tight. Angles change like lightning. He squeezes the trigger. The Brownings roar. The Zero bursts apart in a flash of fire, licking its fuselage. But there is no time to celebrate. Bombers are closing on Enterprise. The scream of dive brakes cuts the sky. The shriek of approaching torpedoes ripples across the sea below. Thatch's voice crackles over the radio. All fighters, break and engage bombers. Weave if tailed. Don't let Zeros pin you down. The Wildcats plunge through layers of enemy aircraft, weaving like threads in a tapestry of fire. Thatch lines up on a dive bomber, fires, and watches its left wing shear off before it plummets into the sea. Enterprise shudders as near misses explode off her starboard side. Smoke rises. Men scream orders. Damage control races to seal ruptures and fight fires. Yet the carrier still moves, still launches, still fights. And above her, the weave continues carving through the enemy assault. At one point, Thatch hears a call that sends a chill through him. "This is Lieutenant Henry Miller. I've got 3 Zeros on me, executing weave but need my wingman. Where are you?" A voice answers, breathless. "Coming in now. Bring them toward me." Seconds later, "Got one. Henry, drop your nose. Drag the second one right. Yes, yes. Pull now." Another kill. The third Zero flees, disoriented, shaken. By noon, the battle is still raging. But something fundamental has shifted. The Japanese pilots, long accustomed to dominance, are being forced into defensive maneuvers. Forced to disengage. Forced to confront an American tactic that neutralizes their aircraft's greatest strength. For the first time since the outbreak of war, the Zero is losing not because it is inferior, but because its enemy has evolved. Thatch levels out his Wildcat, surveying the sky. Smoke trails, burning aircraft, parachutes drifting like white blossoms across the sea. His radio crackles with exhausted voices. "We held them. They couldn't pin us. The weave saved us again." Thatch closes his eyes briefly, not in triumph, in acknowledgement, because this is no longer just his tactic. It is theirs. The pilots who have adopted it, trusted it, bled with it, and proven it in the harshest classroom on Earth. Back aboard Enterprise that evening, as the deck crews scrub soot from the flight deck and the sun bleeds red across the horizon, a young pilot approaches Thatch. His face is dirty, his eyes wide with something between awe and disbelief. "Sir," he says softly, "today, I wasn't afraid of the Zero." Thatch studies him. That sentence, more than any kill report or tactical victory, strikes him deepest. The Japanese fighter that once terrorized the Pacific now meets an enemy who understands how to dismantle its power. The fear barrier, once towering and impenetrable, is cracking, piece by piece, battle by battle. And the weave, simple, elegant, unstoppable, is the hammer. November 6th, 1942. Espiritu Santo, New Hebrides. The lagoon glows a pale turquoise beneath the morning sun as supply barges drift lazily toward the docks. Palm trees sway in the warm breeze. On the surface, Espiritu Santo appears peaceful, almost idyllic. But carved into its jungled interior sits one of the most important hubs of the Pacific War. The rear area air stations where exhausted pilots rotate for rest, refit, and increasingly, training. Inside a long, makeshift operations hut, its roof patched with canvas and spare tin. A crowd of young Navy and Marine aviators gather around a chalkboard. They've just arrived from scattered carrier decks and forward islands, still smelling faintly of salt, oil, and fear. At the front of the room stands Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch. He taps the board once with his knuckle. The room goes silent. "Gentlemen," he begins, "you're here because we need to change the way we fight." He sketches 2 arcs, one sweeping left, one sweeping right, intersecting in a tight X shape. "This," he says, "is not a trick maneuver. It is not a stunt. This is a language. And if you learn to speak it fluently, you will outthink an enemy who has so far relied on outmaneuvering you." A pilot in the front row raises a tentative hand. "Sir, rumor says the weave works every time. Is that true?" Thatch shakes his head. "No tactic works every time. But this one works when discipline is stronger than instinct." He draws 2 additional arcs. Wide, shallow, slower. Your instinct is to evade. Your instinct is to throw your aircraft around, to tighten into the turn the moment you see tracers. If you do that, the 0 wins. Every time. He looks each pilot in the eye. "What I need you to do is trust geometry more than fear." The pilots shift uneasily. Fear, after all, is the most honest thing they know. Outside on the training field, 2 wildcats sit idling on the coral apron. Their propellers whip the air into shimmering vortices. Thatch walks the length of one aircraft, slapping the fuselage lightly as he passes. "Ensign Turner, you're the rabbit today," he says to a wide-eyed 20-year-old gripping his helmet. "Lieutenant Hayes, you're the wolf. Chase smart, not wild." Turner gulps. "Sir, do I try to shake him?" "No," Thatch replies. "You turn toward your wingman, always, even when everything inside you screams to run." He steps back, signaling the mechanics. Both wildcats roll forward, then leap into the sky. From the ground, Thatch watches the dance unfold, the attacker pressing, the defender pulling into the weave, the crossing arcs forming, reforming, tightening like a noose around the enemy. Dust drifts upward each time the roar of engines washes over the field. Hayes calls over the radio. 0 imitation locked. But he's forcing me back into Turner's path. "That's the point," Thatch replies. "Let the geometry complete the kill." Seconds later, Turner's Wildcat slides through Hayes' gun sight. He doesn't fire, but the moment is unmistakable. They all see it. Back on the ground, Turner removes his helmet and laughs nervously. "I swear, sir, I felt like I was flying into suicide." "And yet," Thatch replies, "you survived. Remember that feeling. It's the difference between panic and purpose." Training continues for days. Pilots rotate through mock dogfights. They film maneuvers with borrowed cameras. They redraw diagrams in the sand. They argue, they sweat, they curse, they repeat the sequence until it becomes muscle memory. As word spreads, more squadrons request instruction. Soon, Navy Training Command steps in. A memo arrives with the words Thatch has silently hoped for. Recommend immediate formalization of paired attack avoidance tactic, Thatch Weave, to Navy-wide fighter training. He reads the sentence twice, then folds the paper carefully, placing it inside his logbook. Not for pride, but because this means fewer young men will die without understanding why. Meanwhile, Rabaul. Commander Takeshi Kazuo watches an exhausted Zero pilot stumble into the debriefing room. Sweat darkens the collar of his flight suit. His hands shake as he removes his helmet. Kazuo approaches quietly. "Another engagement?" The pilot nods. They fly toward each other," he says, voice cracking. "Deliberately. It is madness, and yet it works. Every time I commit, another wildcat appears where I least expect." Kazuo studies him. "Did you outturn them?" "Yes." "Outclimb them?" "Yes." "Then what happened?" The pilot stares at the floor. "I still lost." Kazuo closes his eyes. This has become common, too common. The problem isn't that the Americans have matched the Zero in performance. They haven't. The problem is the Americans have stopped playing the game the Japanese expect. Command must know, Kazuo mutters. They must adjust training. But he already senses the truth. The Imperial Navy pilot program, rigid, traditional, steeped in single combat philosophy, cannot pivot as quickly as an American force that is learning, adapting, evolving under fire. Back at Espiritu Santo, Thach stands before a line of pilots preparing to return to combat. Their Wildcats are fully fueled. Ammunition belts glint in the morning sun. The air smells of coconut, petrol, and tension. You know what to do out there, Thach says. His voice is steady but stern. Don't fight alone. Don't improvise. Trust your wingman more than you trust yourself. Hayes nods. Yes, sir. Remember? Thach adds quietly. The Zero is only unbeatable if you let it dictate the fight. They salute and climb into their aircraft. The Wildcats lift off, their engines fading into the high blue. Thach watches them go. Each pilot armed not just with guns and steel, but with something far more dangerous, understanding. For the first time, the American fighter force is no longer a collection of individuals. It is a unified organism, a pack, not prey, and every Zero pilot who meets them in the sky will feel that change. January 14th, 1943. Over the Russell Islands, Central Solomons. The clouds hang low and bruised, churning with the promise of tropical rain as 6 Wildcats from VMF 124 climb steadily through the gray. Their engines hum in tight harmony, an orchestra of steel tuned for war. Behind them, the faint outline of Guadalcanal fades into mist, though none of the pilots need to look back to feel its weight. They've buried too many friends on that island to forget it. Leading the formation is Lieutenant Kenneth K.O. Fraser, a hard-edged Southerner with a burn scar creeping from his jaw into his collar. He joined the war after losing his older brother at Pearl Harbor. He flies now with a coldness that unsettles even veteran pilots. Beside him, weaving slightly but confidently, is Second Lieutenant Billy Gordon, newly arrived from Espiritu Santo. Fresh face, eager eyes, trained personally by Jimmy Thach himself only weeks earlier. The weave is fresh in his muscles, the diagrams still vivid in his mind. Gordon taps his instruments. KO, visibility's dropping. Fraser's voice crackles through the headset like gravel. Keep your spacing. Cloud or not, Zeros love using weather for ambush. The warning proves prophetic. Moments later, a frantic radio burst erupts from the right flank. Contacts, 10 plus, maybe 12, breaking out of the cloud bank at 2 o'clock. Then the faint silhouettes appear. Slender wings, rounded tips. The unmistakable predatory grace of A6M Zeros emerging like ghosts. Gordon's breath catches. Sir, there's so many... Billy, eyes forward. Fraser snaps. We've trained for this. We don't scatter, we weave. The Zeros dive instantly, coordinated and confident, sunlight flashing off their wings. They've likely been vectored in from Bougainville. Their pilots seasoned, hungry to reclaim a myth that has been slipping from their grasp since the early days of Guadalcanal. The attack is vicious. Tracers streak past Gordon's canopy, thin green lines slicing the air a foot from his shoulder. Instinct screams at him to yank the stick hard right, to flee, to break formation. But then Thach's voice echoes in his memory. Trust geometry more than fear. He banks toward Fraser. The weave begins. The air explodes into motion. Wildcats cross paths barely 20 yards apart, engines screaming under the violent G-loads. The Zeros commit immediately, one tailing Gordon, another swinging to cut off Fraser's escape. Gordon wrestles his Wildcat into the inward turn, repeating the rhythm drilled into him during training. The Zero follows, tight, eager, its pilot smelling blood. Fraser's voice snaps through the radio. Bring him in, Billy. Little more. Little more. Now. Gordon crosses Fraser's arc. Fraser fires a perfectly timed burst. The Zero detonates into a blossom of flame and smoke. A fiery flower scattering petals of metal into the clouds. Gordon gasps. Jesus, did you see? No time. Another one on your tail? Drag him. Gordon turns again, the enemy glued to him. But this Zero pilot is clever. He widens the chase, trying to avoid crossing into the kill zone. Fraser adjusts instantly. He's smart, but not smarter than us. He rolls left, tightening the weave. The Zero swings wider, misjudging the geometry by a hair. That hair is fatal. A third wildcat pair, Hutchins and Vale, intersect the arc. Vale firing a burst that slices the Zero's wing clean off. The fighter spirals downward, smoke trailing like a black ribbon. But the enemy adapts. 3 Zeros break off together, forming a compact attack unit designed to overwhelm a single wildcat pair. They latch onto Fraser's tail, relentless and merciless. Gordon sees it immediately. KO, 3 on you, break. No, Fraser says. We hold the weave. Bring them toward me. But sir, bring them in. Gordon turns. The 3 Zeros follow Fraser. Committed, aggressive, falling into the same trap that had claimed so many before them. But this time, the angles are tighter, the approach more desperate, and the margin for survival razor thin. Vale's voice shouts over the radio, "We're in position, cross now!" Fraser crosses. Gordon mirrors. The Zeros streak in behind Fraser, too close, too determined to pull away. Vale and Hutchins open fire simultaneously. 2 Zeros erupt in flames. The third peels upward, but too late. Its belly fills Hutchins' gun sight. A final burst tears through the engine cowling, and the Japanese fighter plummets into the cloud deck below. Silence hangs in the aftermath, broken only by heavy breathing and the hum of straining engines. Fraser exhales slowly. That's how it's done, gentlemen. Gordon swallows hard. Sir, my hands are shaking. That means you're still alive. For the rest of the engagement, the Wildcats maintain the weave with machine-like discipline. They lose no aircraft. The Japanese lose 9. The myth of Zero invincibility takes another mortal blow. Back on Guadalcanal that evening, Gordon sits on an overturned fuel drum, staring at his trembling hands. The adrenaline hasn't faded. The terror hasn't faded. But layered over both is something fierce and new. Belief. Fraser sits beside him, chewing the end of a cigar. Billy, you did what men better trained and better equipped couldn't do 6 months ago. Gordon rubs his temples. It's just strange. They were supposed to be unbeatable. Fraser grunts. Son, the Zero's a fine machine, but it ain't magic. And today you proved it bleeds. Gordon looks up toward the darkening sky, listening to distant thunder roll across the island. For the first time since arriving in the Pacific, the clouds don't feel like hiding places for death. They feel like places where Americans can fight and win, because now the Zero's greatest weapon, fear, has begun to die in the hearts of the men who once dreaded its shadow. June 1st, 1943. Nas, North Island, San Diego. The Pacific breeze rolls in off the water, carrying the tang of salt and the faint scent of jet fuel as a new generation of pilots marches across the tarmac toward the training hangar. Its walls vibrate faintly with the rumble of engines being tested somewhere down the line. Inside awaits a lecture. Not from a professor, not from a theorist, but from the man whose quiet ingenuity reshaped the American approach to air combat. Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Thatch stands at the front of the room, hands behind his back, watching as these young aviators file in. Some are barely 20. Some have seen remote parts of the Pacific already. All of them have heard the stories. The battles over Guadalcanal, the desperate defense of Henderson Field, the day the Zero's aura cracked. Thatch clears his throat. Gentlemen, take your seats. The projector hums to life, casting a grainy image of 2 fighters crossing paths at a tight angle. a freeze frame of the thatch weave captured on film during a training flight. "I want to talk to you today," Thatch begins, "about how thinking saved lives when machinery couldn't." A few pilots lean forward. Others glance at the photograph with awe. One whispers, "That's the weave," as if naming a ghost. Thatch nods toward the image. "When this war started, we faced an enemy aircraft that outperformed ours in nearly every dimension. The Mitsubishi A6M0. Fast, agile, deadly. In the early months, we lost good men because we tried to fight the Zero its way." He lets the silence stretch. "You do not beat a superior airplane by pretending you have one of your own." He picks up a stick of chalk and draws 2 arcs on the board, smooth, precise, interlocking. This tactic wasn't born in a conference room. It wasn't devised by a committee. It came from necessity and matchsticks on a kitchen table. It came from looking at the problem differently, from refusing to let despair dictate our thinking. The room is silent. Every pilot who came out of Guadalcanal alive did so because he learned to rely on his wingman. The weave forced cooperation, discipline, trust. These aren't just tactical principles. They're human ones. He underlines the arcs. This maneuver was not about beating the Zero. It was about beating fear. Thousands of miles away. Yokosuka Naval Air Station, Japan. The atmosphere is equally tense, but with a different flavor. One of reckoning. Commander Takeshi Kazuo reads the latest intelligence summary, his eyebrows tightening. Reports detail American pilots executing paired maneuvers with increasing sophistication. Zeros struggling to corner Wildcats. Kill ratios shifting, confidence eroding among once fearless Japanese aviators. He closes the folder and looks out across the airfield, where new pilots practice takeoffs unaware that the old certainties have died in the Solomon skies. Kazuo mutters under his breath, "Ingenuity." The Americans used ingenuity. He knows now that no amount of training in single combat superiority can compensate for an enemy who refuses to play by expected rules. Japan's pilot corps, elite, disciplined, but rigid, is losing a contest of adaptation, and deep down, he fears it may already be too late. Back in San Diego. The conclusion of the lecture. Thatch steps forward, folding his hands on the podium as he delivers the final lesson. Some of you will face the Zero. Some won't. But all of you will face an enemy who has an advantage you do not. When that day comes, remember this. Skill matters, courage matters, but creativity. Creativity is what keeps you alive. He pauses, eyes scanning the room, because a pilot who can outthink his opponent can outfly him, even in an inferior machine. A buzz rolls through the room as the pilots absorb the words, not inspiration, resolve. Thatch motions toward the hangar doors. "Now let's take this outside. Diagrams won't save you. Practice will." The men rise, energized, marching toward the flight line. Outside, rows of Wildcats and newly arriving Hellcats sit waiting under the cloud-streaked sky. The training schedule is brutal, unrelenting, purposeful. As the engines roar to life and the Wildcats taxi out one by one, Thatch steps aside, watching their shadows stretch across the sunlit concrete. He feels older, tired but proud. Proud not that he invented a tactic, but that he helped men survive long enough to change the war. Later that evening, he sits alone on a bench near the shoreline, watching gulls drift over the water. The sun dips low, burning orange on the horizon. The rhythmic sound of waves fades into the quiet ache of memory. The first time he used matchsticks, he couldn't have imagined this. Carrier decks saved, rookie pilots hardened into veterans, the tide in the Solomon Islands reversed by a pattern of intersecting flight paths. A simple idea, born from desperation, forged into doctrine by courage. Thatch closes his eyes. He hears the voices of the pilots he trained, sees the Zeros bursting into flame, feels the tense, electric moment when the American fighter force stopped fearing the enemy and started thinking like hunters. The war is far from over. New enemy aircraft will appear, new tactics will be needed. But the lesson of the weave, the lesson of creativity under pressure, will never fade. Because this is more than a maneuver. It is a reminder that ingenuity wins wars when brute force cannot. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, the last shadow of zero invincibility finally dissolves, replaced by the hard-earned truth the Pacific would never forget. The Americans didn't beat the zero with better airplanes. They beat it with better ideas.